Again, hello everyone and welcome to the Boss Omega Yeast virtual tasting, the October 2021 meeting. Next slide, please.
You need a little clicker.
Spacebar. There it is. So we have two guests today coming in from Omega. Lance Shaner, as you can see with the super rad beard tonight. And then Chris Bernardo, who is the innovation brewer who helped us with this project, the newly married Chris Bernardo. So welcome, friends. Appreciate your time here.
Thanks.
For those of you who don't know everything about Omega Yeast, oh, you were on the right track there, Steve. Next slide. There we go. So Omega Yeast, located in Chicago, hands down the freshest yeast you're going to get your hands on here in the homebrew world. They produce liquid yeast and newly dried Kveik yeast as well for both pro brewers and home brewers. Over 75 different strains, and they believe in 3 key business attributes. And I stole all of this from their website, so bear with me here. It's be fresh, be curious, and be helpful. And that last one, without a doubt, is the one that they're here helping us with today. They were willing to help us with all of this beer and beer related education. And so we couldn't be more pleased with the turnout as well as the project itself. So again, we really want to thank you guys for coming out. Been looking forward to this for a long time. So yes. On the next slide, let's talk about the base beer. So Chris, you want to talk to us just briefly about the base beer? We said 70-30 on the grist, and then Citra, Idaho 7, and Mosaic on the hops. What kind of hopping schedule did you do on this? So
I did a little bit of Citra at the very beginning, but I wanted to focus on some later additions just to give it a more juicy punch at the end. And then I did one dry hop addition at about half pound per barrel. So a pretty light dry hop addition just to give it an extra aromatic burst, just to kind of help accentuate the yeasts that we chose for it. So there are a lot of the yeasts that we chose were very fruit ester forward.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty cool to me. Next slide.
Yeah, easier said than done.
Spacebar. There it is.
Yeah, spacebar, arrow keys, none of that. Yeah.
None of that's working. That's wonderful. Again, we will edit in post. So
are we going to start, Ed, with number 1? Is that the plan?
I believe so. I think Chris already jumped the gun and poured beer number 1. So if everyone wants to get out their beer number 1,
need to give me a minute. I need to go get my beers. So
we'll give you a minute. I got to get somebody else a link here too.
It could actually be beneficial to grab 2 glasses and pour them side by side just to see the differences too.
I want this one. Why are you looking at the little glass?
All right, so 1 and 4 we're comparing. Pour those side by side.
1 and 4 will be our side by side, and that'll be our first set.
Okay.
I don't know what this is.
We'll let everyone get prepared here.
And this one's 4. We gotta compare them.
So the 1 and the 4?
Get your glass.
Okay.
All right, so beer number 1 and beer number 4.
I'm gonna try the 4.
You're saying pour them both now?
Is that what we're saying to do, Chris? We pour them both at the same time, or what do we?
Yeah, I would pour them both at the same time. just so you could get a better sensory difference between the two.
All right.
Number 1 and number 2, that's what we're saying?
1 and 4.
Got
Beers 1 and 4 are a set.
I like
Right there on the slide, Scott. Right there.
I never learned to read.
It says the librarian.
Now, boys, play nice.
They're similar, but number 1, they're more bitter. And
Did my slide turner come back? Steve, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right.
more number
We need to go to the next slide, or are we still working on 1 and 4?
We're starting with 1 and 4. So go ahead and click on to the next slide. Let's start with beer number 1. So Chris, take it away, or Lance, either one. Take your pick.
I'll talk about the yeast at least. So it is a Kveik, and the Hornindal. It's not a strain; it's actually a collection of strains. So there's at least 9 different strains within this blend. We received this blend from Lars in Norway and have done our utmost to keep it as the original blend was. I don't believe we had to isolate this away from bacteria. I think it was a clean yeast blend when we got it. And it's one of the more expressive Kveiks. It gives some fruitiness, especially when you push the fermentation temperatures on this. Chris can speak to how he treated it, but generally speaking, when this one's fermented warm, it tends to be a little more expressive and get some stone fruit and one of the pineapple, dried fruit sort of smells from it. But yeah, it's Chris, was this fermented warm, or was this just like a?
This was pitched at 85 and there was no temperature control for it. So it more than likely pushed around 90 degrees at peak fermentation temp.
Hey, Lance, do you guys have any, when you mentioned you try to keep it the same blend as you originally received, do you guys have any way to identify or to keep the yeast strains sort of, I guess, in check or in balance for the percentages?
So the way we kind of do that with the strains, we have the original culture was frozen away in our -80 C, and for this strain, every time we start a propagation, we start from that freezer stock. So we'll streak out a smear from the freezer stock. And the other thing we do that's different from this, from good microbiological technique, is you would normally start from a single colony, so you'd know it's a clonal population. But of course, we don't want to do that in this case because it's multiple strains. So we actually take care to do the complete opposite of that and take a big smear off of the plate to try to make sure we're getting a representative sample of it. And just to avoid, with other pure strains, once we exhaust one plate, we'll actually plate onto another plate and kind of use that. We go a couple generations out that way before we go back to the freezer. But with Hornindal, to try to maintain that blend and make sure nothing drifts, every time we start a propagation, we start with a new streak out of the freezer and do that same thing where we take a big smear. We do unusual things with this one to try to maintain that original blend.
Back from a starter vial, basically, like get it all back to zero. Yeah, cool, awesome.
So did I hear you say that you actually got this original batch from Lars Garshall?
Yeah, he sent it in a baggie, like a little plastic baggie, some flakes.
And that didn't get stopped at the border.
No, yeah. Somehow we get things stopped at foreign borders all the time when we ship them, but a mysterious baggie with flakes in it did not get stopped on its way to us.
Cavity search, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it did smell a little funny now that you mention it.
Did they when you had it sent to you or whatever, like how did you connect with Lars? How did that connection come to be?
We reached out to him. I mean, this back in 2015. I think Adi actually at the lab was the first one to kind of discover the Lars blog within at Omega, and so we were both reading about it, and it's like, wow, these things sound amazing. So we just reached out to him through Facebook and asked him if there was any chance we could get a hold of them. And he actually at that time didn't get back to us. So I thought we were crackpots or something. But does this face look like a crackpot? And so we actually reached out to the NCYC, which is a British yeast bank. And that's where Lars had been kind of sending all these things to get kind of evaluated and stored. And they're available to the public. So we actually got our first Kveiks from them. So Hothead was the first commercially released Kveik in the world. And that came from NCYC. And then I think that started to kind of get some attention. And then Lars was like, okay, they're legitimate, organizations. So he got back to us. So future ones we got straight from Lars.
Very cool. Very cool. Can you jump to the next slide, Steve?
Whoa, look at that. Right on time.
Well, there you go.
Nailed it. Nailed it. So yeah, so for those of you who don't know this is the education part of this here. So Lars Garshol kind of like had this blog overseas, was touting all of these Norwegian farmhouse ales and was talking about how hardy they were, how freakishly tolerant of heat they are. And apparently Omega did some additional studies to confirm all of this. What does that, can I ask Lance what that looks like in terms of the heat tolerance studies? Like, did you just cook the hell out of these things, or like what, like how did this, what did you do?
So the initial, I mean, it's the initial experiments is just making 15 gallons of wort and splitting it 3 ways. And I mean, much, kind of like we did with this setup, but split it 3 ways and fermented at 3 different temperatures and, packaged it up and taste tested, and we're pretty blown away when we did that first one with Hothead or Stronda. I mean, we really couldn't. That one seems very consistent across the board. So but at no temperature was it fusily or overly estery. It was a very pleasant drink, even when we'd fermented at 95. So we were sold on these things right away that they were something special. There's been, a lot more rigorous work done since then to show that they are indeed special, and we've done some of that. I mean, if we plate these things out and put them in an incubator that's at 102 degrees Fahrenheit, the Kveik will survive on that plate, and really nothing else will. So it's not just that the Norwegians are brewing them at warmer temperatures; they're legitimately more tolerant of these stressful conditions than other brewing yeast.
How ironic that you have a Scandinavian country where we always assume things are cold, and they ought to be able to brew year-round with traditional yeast. And here it comes, bring on the warm weather. Climate change adapted, right?
Yeah, and I mean the explanations for why why it became this way were that they really didn't have any sort of wort chillers or anything like that to cool their wort. So basically they were just feeling the wort, and when it got to basically body temperature is when they'd pitch their yeast. And when you're dealing with a large volume, even in a cold environment, and you're dunking it in snow and whatnot, it takes a while to get from boiling temperature down to that temperature. So I imagine they kind of evolved out of impatience to some degree, that when it got to where it felt comfortable and like it wasn't gonna torch anything, they pitched their yeast, and over time, just kind of acclimated to that.
Next slide. Or yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what's the difference between 1 and 2 as far as the yeast strains? I mean, what I guess were you going for between the different beers and the flavors?
What was number 4? Have we gotten to that yet?
I think they said that 1 and 4 were kind of the pair that we're supposed to be tasting against.
Right. So next, if you hit the next slide, that should be beer 4. And that should be
Okay.
Voss.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That one is the one I like.
Yeah.
That is so good.
So Voss generally presents as a little more citrusy, kind of orange zest forward, compared to Hornindal, which is just kind of generally fruity and kind of dried fruit type aromas. So it's just a little more citrus, which I think comes through in this, getting a little more citrus.
I prefer this number 4. I don't know if we're at the phase of kind of evaluating the differences, but I think the Hornadal, it's drier and there's more bitterness at the end.
This one is.
And I almost think you need a bigger, hazier beer to stand up to that yeast, whereas the Voss, a lot smoother.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Voss is a single strain. So I think when that came to us, it was a blend of 2 strains, but we essentially just chose one consistent good performer out of that 2 strain blend when we got it, just to make it a little easier on ourselves.
So is the Voss one of the isolated strains from the other blend of yeasts, or it's
So, Voss and Hornindal came from different farms, essentially.
gotcha?
And that's the naming convention, right? Like this is Sigmund Voss's farm, and the other one is Hornindal's farm, family farm,
Well,
or whatever it is.
I'm not sure if the convention has changed a little bit over time, but these are regions, I think. Voss and Hornindal are locations. So I'm sure I'm torturing his name, but like Voss came from this Sigmund Uranus. Maybe there's somebody with Norwegian heritage here that can pronounce that better. But so I think maybe there's some. I'd have to actually get on the registry. I haven't been on there in a while. But there might be like, Voss number 1, Voss number 2, because since those initial cultures were obtained, he's found more from the same regions. So I think it's gone to kind of a numbering, but he might be using people's names in some of them too. I don't know if he's maintained a strict convention with his naming.
They're both very good. They're excellent. Yeah.
What do we think the origin of these yeasts were? Were they wild yeasts in those regions, and they isolated those?
So the genetics are supportive of a hybridization theory. So they seem to be hybrids of domesticated brewing yeast from Europe and a wild yeast of some sort. Saccharomyces, both Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So at some point there was a mating event between a wild yeast and a domesticated brewing yeast, which kind of stands to reason because they've got features of both of those things. But I mean, like the fact that they're non-phenolic is definitely a giveaway of kind of a domestication event, because most wild yeast that you're going to run into are actually phenolic.
Yeah, the Hornadal it's darker than the Voss as well. The beer is, in appearance.
Right. It's also possible that there could be very variable oxidation, considering the number of transfers.
Yeah.
Because it's going to look always bitter too.
So how many strains overall of the Kveik do you carry?
We have 4. Hornindal Voss, Hothead, Espa, 5, and
Five,
Lutra.
yeah.
Lutra, though, is an isolate of out of the Hornindal blend. So it's a single strain that was isolated out of the Hornindal blend.
Actually, I can taste the yeast.
And Chris, what's your take on these two? Why did you push for these two out of the run?
Honestly, it was strain popularity. I mean, it would have strain popularity blended with like the flavor profiles that they bring forward. Like Lutra's probably our best seller, maybe.
Of the Kveiks.
Oh, the Kveik, correct.
Yeah.
But it's Lutra in itself is very like neutral, low ester profile. In terms of flavor, we did a side-by-side sensory like of all the Kveiks, and Voss and Hornindal were rated the favorite from the staff that got to try the sensory. And honestly, Voss is my favorite to use. Just because of the like really bright citrus notes. I feel like that really helps accentuate a lot of, hop characteristics and whatnot. And on top of that, it's my go-to yeast for co-pitching kettle sours too.
So when you do projects like this, like how, like maybe I'm going in the wrong direction with this, but like when you decide you're gonna co-pitch, for instance, like I think I had your pineapple sour with Cosmic Punch at Chaos, right? So like, what makes you want to experiment with that and co-pitching? Like, where's the draw there?
So co-pitching comes from the idea that right after the souring process is done, right after the lactose souring process is done, you don't necessarily have to pasteurize. So put it through a boil and pasteurization after the lactic souring phase is finished. You just pitch transfer into your fermenter and pitch the yeast. That generally sours the beer a little farther, and you get a little bit less attenuation. But I find that when you're co-pitching with Voss, since you're souring around like 90 degrees anyways, a day after you'll drop to like 3-4 pH, which is exactly where I like to have my kettle sours. And it's still around 85 degrees. Pitch a Kveik. Don't bother with the pasteurization process. And it'll ferment hot, bring forward some of those citrus flavors, citrus esters and whatnot. And, you'll have a really, really fast kettle sour with really bright citrus flavors that pair really well with the lactic sourness too.
And this all happens very fast.
Yes.
Very convenient.
Yeah.
I really like the flavor of the Voss, Chris. I agree with you. It almost gives you sort of some more of the floral hop characters, where it's just basically the base beer and the base brew, yet it brings forward quite a bit of flavor there. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like, when you're baking, a lot of the times the recipes call for some acidity, especially with like berries and like tropical fruits and whatnot. Throw some acidity in there, and it doesn't really add that like orange or lemon flavor. It just overall brightens the aromas and flavors of the of what you want to shine in the food, and in this case the beer.
It's nice. Yeah.
Well, I'll speak what I get out of it. Number one, first of all, both of them have a bit of a haze. I took mine out about 15 minutes before we started. I see that there's got to be a chill haze because it seems to be getting a bit clearer, but that's the same in both of them. Number one, I think I pick up kind of like a dusty note initially, more citrusy fruit in my nose on that. Malt character is pretty much the same on both. I think number one has kind of a cleaner taste to me. Nice balance, nice hop bitterness at the finish. I would summarize it by saying it was slightly more fruity. Number four, I get more mineral notes in that. Some of it may be stone fruit, but tropical fruit for sure, more so than I got in number one. The mineral finish also. So mineral is the character that I would describe to number four. Fruity is number one. I thought that the number four, the mouthfeel was a little bit bigger than number one. Hell, if we had a whole bunch more, I'd be satisfied sampling these for quite a while.
Yeah, so according to my notes, Hornindal and Voss attenuated about the same. Wait a minute, hold on. Not looking at the right thing.
And how long was the fermentation time for these?
These reached terminal in a week. In a week to pitching, because honestly, it probably reached terminal a few days before that. But I checked in a week and they reached terminal. Hornindal finished a little bit higher in gravity. So you should have a little bit more sweetness to the, I believe sample 4 it was.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would almost think that there's a little bit more body to the number 4, the first one we tried, the Hornindal, than there was in the second one. But they're both very tasty. But I agree with Dick that I really like the citrusy notes and the fruit esters that you get out of the Voss. I think that's really impressive.
What was the original gravity on the beer and the terminal gravity?
Oh, not the same color.
A little bit lighter.
This one they have it like more caramel.
Chris, you're muted. Chris, you're muted.
Sorry, the hold on. Let me pull it back up. Of course, I X'd the screen out as soon as you started mentioning. I should more than likely just leave this open, right? So the original gravity was 13 Plato. And terminal terminal was 1.5 on the Voss and 1.6 on the Hornindal. So a little over 6%.
I would have guessed the opposite. I would have thought the Hornindal maybe finished lower just because of the dryness.
Yeah, the Hornindal actually finished like a 10th higher.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would think it would have been lower though.
Yeah, it's like marginal.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those are both really dry. I mean, I just had to pull up the conversion table here because I'm used to doing in specific gravity, but I mean,
Yeah,
that's between 1006 and 1008.
I think it's like 85% attenuation around there, which is
Boston. Hornindal are both monsters.
Yeah.
Are any of the Kveik yeasts good flocculators?
They're all like, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe they're all like medium to high.
Yeah, hothead is really,
Hot
really
Head is
high.
insane. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing flocks like an English ale strain. Lutra's pretty high. Again, a Hornindal is a blend, so it's got some strain. Well, Lutra was in it, so it's got the high flocculating Lutra within it. But there's also some low flock, so it's a blend of both. Voss is pretty high. I'd call it more medium to medium high. Espa is probably the least. That's also a blend of multiple strains, but that one seems to be the least flocculent out of the Kveiks that we have.
Oh,
I think we've beat this horse here. Do we want to move on to the next round?
Sure. Let me clean out my glass.
Yeah.
Let me finish this one. It's so good. Let me get the glasses. I guess my favorite one is number 4. I mean, it's not that strong than the other one, but I really like this one. It's really good.
So the next piece of this is about thiols and biotransformation. Can somebody with a science degree kind of break this down for us? Would that be possible?
Sure. So there are, a couple types of biotransformation, but generally speaking, we're talking about either the conversion of one aroma compound to a different aroma compound by yeast activity, or the release of aroma compounds from precursor forms that are inert. And the thiol biotransformation is really the latter. So we're talking about this pool of precursors that are present in malt and hops that aren't aroma active because the aromatic thiol is bound up to an amino acid or a chain of amino acids, and in that form it's not active. So we can get at that pool with the right enzyme, and there may be other slides. Should I talk about what exactly this strain we're trying is doing, or do we have a slide?
I was gonna say, what's the next slide?
This one.
Yeah. Oh, this is So this is some of what I'm saying is basically there's these precursor forms that aren't aromatic, and when you've got the right enzyme, in this case it's what's called a beta lyase. It can cut that cysteine molecule off of the 3SH, which is the primary thiol that you smell, and it frees it up. And these are really kind of neat compounds because they're aroma active at extremely small quantities. So we're talking in the parts per trillion. So it takes hardly any to be aroma active. The 3SH is at 60 parts per trillion. There is a ester version of that is even lower. It's at around 4 parts per trillion, 3SHA. So it doesn't take much. And the neat thing about it, I think, is that there's a lot of this precursor in both malt and hops. So a lot of the experiments that we do when we're trying to test the differences between strains is actually ferment malt with no hops in it whatsoever. And with these strains that we've designed to increase this enzyme activity, you can smell, grapefruit and passion fruit coming out of the glass, and you haven't added any hops to it. It's and actually when we're propping big tanks of this, I can tell when I walk in the door. I mean, when I just open the first door to work, I'm like, oh, we're propping Cosmic Punch today, because it's like it's so aromatic, and my nose could take me to the tank it's in without looking at the sheet that's attached to the tank. It's a very, very pronounced aroma, but they are very susceptible to oxidation. They're very, very reactive. So in this case, I'm actually not entirely sure we're going to be able to smell them because they are sensitive. But in this case, I think we probably have what we call the parental version. So British 5 was what we used as the parent, which is the most widely propped strain we have that people use for hazy IPAs all over the place. And we took that strain and gave it the ability to do this thiol biotransformation. So the gene for that actually came from Chico. So the famous Chico strain has an active version of that gene, but in Chico it's not on. So just in high nitrogen conditions, this gene's not expressed. So what we did was gave it a new promoter, which is the element of a gene that tells it when and how much it should be expressed. So we gave it a promoter that is basically doesn't care if there's nitrogen around, it's just on all the time. So we've effectively just tricked the yeast into making this enzyme all the time, even though it doesn't need it, just so we can convert these thiol precursors that are present in the malt and the hops. So otherwise, these two strains are absolutely identical except for this capability.
So Lance, have you guys actually done some manipulation of the gene sequencing, or are you just doing promoters in the batches itself to influence the enzyme production?
We used the CRISPR-Cas9 system, so the system that won the Nobel Prize last year. So where we actually take this piece of DNA and use CRISPR to cut a specific target in the cell, and it basically loops in the DNA that we want to be looped in. So we could take the gene from Chico and put it into British 5 and give it that capability.
That's cool. So basically, it's a little bit of like a genetically modified, yeast strain, for instance. I mean,
There's a lot of nuance in the terminology, because in our case, it's what we call cisgenic. So it's all yeast DNA, as opposed to something that's transgenic, where you take, for example, and we play around with this stuff too, but where you can take a lactate dehydrogenase gene from a bacteria and put that into yeast to give it the capability of making lactic acid itself. That's a transgenic organism. We've taken all yeast components and just kind of like rearranged them. But so there's no foreign DNA. It's just yeast DNA kind of moved around.
No, very cool though. That's awesome. So are we going to move on to the next beers? Are we going to number 3 and what is it? Number 3 and number 2?
Yes, sir.
For sure, like, what was that one?
2.
Number 2.
Next slide.
Pouring beers, Adam. Pouring beers.
I understand.
Ooh,
It was a British ale.
This is why.
So British ale is number 2, and then that's the hazy strain.
And this one
Is what you guys were saying?
Yep. So it's the same thing as London Ale 3. If you've used the Y strain, or Imperial's Juice, or it's the same strain. I think thought to be from, oh God, what's the brewery?
Fuller's?
No, Fuller's is the super flocculent one that doesn't create much hate. Boddington. Boom.
Boddington.
That is it. Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yep. So, it generally leaves a malty finish. If we went more aggressively on the dry hops, it would be much more hazy. In combination with dry hopping, the strain gets uber hazy. It's quite flocculent. This is actually a good opportunity I always like to dispel notions when I can. And haze and flocculation are completely unrelated. You can get very, very hazy beer with a very, very flocculent yeast, and that is kind of what happens with British 5. It is a very flocculent yeast. But when you ferment it in the presence of a lot of dry hops, it's doing something, and we're still actually trying to figure out what it's doing, because it does something different than a lot of other strains. But it creates a very stable colloidal haze, but it's not yeast hanging around suspension. You can centrifuge the beer and it's still hazy, so there's no yeast hanging around at all. I think still a lot of professional brewers still think that. I mean, we get emails all the time saying, "I want a non-flocculent yeast so I can do hazy IPAs." I'm like, that's not. No, it's they're unrelated concepts. You don't, if you're getting haze, I mean, yeast and suspension absolutely create a haze, but that's not the haze we're going for in any IPA. That's a biological haze, and you taste that. You get like kind of a yeasty, unpleasant bite to it, which should not be there. So it's something else. It's like proteins and polyphenols that create this stable colloidal haze.
I was going to ask.
Not only are you giving them the yeast, but you're also teaching them how to brew, is what you're saying.
There's plenty of that. You know, I don't know if you haven't learned it, you haven't learned it. And you know, you see haze, and I mean, you know, when beer's fermenting, there's yeast floating around. It looks hazy, so it's not, you know, outlandish to think that, but it's something we definitely try to dispel. And you know, when I mean, Cosmic Punch, the other beer number 3. Just like this one, it shows high flocculation, and you know, we're telling people that you can make hazies with it, and that doesn't compute to some people. You know, that we're saying it's high flocculation, but it's great for hazy IPAs because they're still linking those concepts. So I definitely think it's worth mentioning when I can.
I was going to ask Lance about the protein content. Have you guys tried to follow the protein content of the different beers?
We actually have a collaboration ongoing with Fisher Scientific, where we are kind of examining the proteome. So yeah, what proteins are changing and what's different between hazy strains and non-hazy strains, and we're doing the genetics alongside that. So no answers yet, but it is something we are tracking.
Cool.
So just to circle back to the top of the presentation, this is the same wort as the first 2 beers that we drank, and same hopping schedule and everything?
Exact same everything with the exception of fermentation temperature for the Kveik strains.
Got it. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think what sometimes what I get with the Thiols is kind of like a grapefruit pithiness, almost. You think it's drier, but it's really not. If you know, check the gravity, I think that's coming through here. When these are fresh, I think you get more of the grapefruit and passion fruit hit with it. That again, these are very, very sensitive to oxygen. So I mean, you can ask Chris all about that sort of thing, and struggling with our kind of half-assed system to try to you know, keep them as thiol rich as we can, because it's a struggle. I mean, it's frankly kind of hard to make really good any IPAs at home just because oxygen is brutal to these things.
We actually did we've got a picnic that we have every year, and it was actually really funny that we did a trial with somebody in our club who brews you know, lagers regularly and is very good at it. And we did a side-by-side challenge where we took one glass of beer and we put it on the countertop in front of the sunlight, and we had another one that was fresh, and it was there in literally within 5 minutes. It made a difference. Like, it literally changed the flavor of the beer, and people could try it and say, this was the one that was sitting in the sun. And that opened my eyes to the fact that it was that quick that things change. I mean, it was really pretty impressive.
Yeah, there have been times where I poured myself a Pilsner in a glass and then walked outside. I'm like, why did I do that? I should have continued to drink that out of a can.
Yeah.
What is better in the can?
So Steve, you want to jump to the next slide?
Yep.
We'll gloss over that one real quick, because that's the explanation that British ale was modified to make Cosmic Punch. And so then if you want to go ahead and head forward there.
So yeah,
Cosmic Punch is wonderful. I can vouch for it from again from the Chaos Brewfest. If you guys didn't go, there was a nice, like, huge fruit. It was like a huge fruit pineapple sour bomb thing. I don't even know, like, but it was wonderful, especially given how hot it was that day.
Is this Cosmic Punch number 3? Is that the okay?
The custom one, they have like a
And Ed, your cider won second in that.
It
Right?
did with Sundew.
Yep. Yep, using Cosmic Punch.
No. Sundew. Sundew was
Sundew.
the yeast for that.
That's right.
So,
Do you like this one?
but I do know that Tommy at Brickstone has a variation of either APA or Hop Skip or something coming out where he's using Cosmic Punch. I just found that out here in the last week, and he was very excited when he heard we were doing this event, because he was very eager to try the Cosmic Punch variant on his commercial system.
Yeah, that's a fun. I mean, look for that when you can get it, because that's a fun thing to, when get to know a beer very well and see. And again, I'm pretty sure he uses British 5 on that normally, so you'll see how different it is with that, and it'll probably be more substantial when, again, on a professional system where we can control, for oxidation a lot better.
So I'm using the exact same size and shape glasses, and I poured all these beers the same way. And the Cosmic Punch Ale beer has got crazy head retention compared to the other three. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. I mean, yeah, like I said, the major difference between the two should be the thiol output, but otherwise should be identical. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, there wasn't anything thrown in there to like improve or retain head retention. So that is interesting. Oh, look at that.
So 64 and 75. And the other one, the wall was like it was different temperature.
All glasses treated the same way, but when you clean them, there's an interesting trick when you clean your glasses. Pour when they're still wet inside. Take a salt shaker and shake it inside. Take your cloth or clean fingers and rub it around the inside of the glass. It breaks up any film that's there. Old bartender showed me that back in the 1960s, and it still holds true.
This one again. I really like this one. So good.
So what's the next slide here at this point? Is that the end? Is that how we finished it?
That's how we finish it. Yeah, there we go.
That's how we finish it.
I like
So the beers overall here, has anyone done a 4x4 here yet? I just poured mine out now to see how this was going to go. So I don't know.
it.
Well, I'll give you my notes on 2 and 3. 2, sweet aroma, nice malt character. The number 3, I get a mineral or kind of a dusty initial aroma. Pick up some grapefruit kinds of notes. Sweet, both of them are sweet. Number 2, I get maybe some more tropical kind of note. Number 3 seems to have they have a nice long finish with more hop bitterness. Number 2 was a slightly sweeter finish. And I didn't think to try to compare all 4. So I just, I tried to do it each pair.
No, it's for me, it's so strange to think that the yeast choice would make such a huge difference in each of these beers, but it does. I mean, they all are, I mean, they're similar. Like if you were to serve them to me in a row, I don't think I'd be able to pick it out. but having them all side by side, you can definitely tell that there's differences
Oh yeah.
in the beers, and it's just something else.
Yeah, you can tell.
Well, the Kveik strains versus the other two, in my mind, are night and day. They taste totally different.
Yeah, that'll have a lot to do also with like, I mean, on top of the different esters you're getting, and like, you know, some of the biotransformation with hops, everything, also like releasing some of those volatile aromatics and everything. Like, just the attenuation of the British ale or the British strains alone, just generally being a little bit lower, you're also going to get a lot of like residual sweetness. The maltiness will come through a little bit more. The amount that yeast does to beer is very underappreciated, I feel.
It's the best part. It's the best part.
Absolutely. 100% the best part of beer.
Hey, Steve Sikorsky, could you go back to the slide that has like the beer recipe? It's probably near the start.
Yeah, it's pretty early on. Yeah.
It's not that one.
Those two guys going in there.
Oh, here we
There you
go.
go. Yeah.
Thank you.
So pale in Munich basically is the grain bill and some Citra and you guys didn't go over the top as far as the hops. I mean, it's a pale beer, so I would assume the hops is probably pretty minimal.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
about 40 IBUs. So not too much. There was also so it was 40 IBUs, mostly late additions, and then like a half pound per barrel in the fermenter for dry hopping.
And
so
you guys brewed what is a 7 barrel batch for this, or is it
just a 1 barrel batch.
1 barrel? Okay.
Yeah, we kept 10 gallons for like staff sensory and whatnot. Yeah, but there was, you know, we did have to transfer from our kegs to your kegs and from your keg to your bright for canning and everything. So some oxidation occurred.
Sure.
But you know, you're always welcome over at Omega if you want to try some.
What did you ferment the other 10 gallons with?
I think it was all Voss. Or no, it was the Voss and Hornindal. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Is there a tasting room at Omega?
Not official.
we're all going to show up tomorrow.
We can come drink now.
Yeah.
A tasting-ish room.
They're getting line now or no? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's an underground thing. You need the password.
I mean, the thing about yeast to me, I mean, you know, when I was starting out, it was just everything was just like 1056, 1056, 1050. Like it was just one yeast strain, and that's all you had to really deal with. So I think this even for me is like it's still a newer thing. I know these yeasts have been around for a while, but you know, it's like always dependent on like the California ale, like that'll get you through. And then, you know, you didn't really realize the subtleties that like yeast would kind of add to your beers. So this has been great.
Well, and this is just a lighter style beer. I mean, I'd be curious to try this with, you know, a dark ale, like a Schwarzbier grist or something like that. And then you do a lager versus an ale strain or whatever as well, and see what kind of flavors you draw out of the same grist there on a darker grain bill.
Even a darker amber kind of ale, you know, something that's got a little bit more character and malt to it, and that'd be kind of interesting.
That was going to be my question. Is obviously, you know, the hazies are driving the world right now, but what I would be curious to, you know, start playing with these strains, especially British Ale 5, and then whatever number 3 is called in other styles. Like I think it'd be fun to see where you can take those.
Yeah, and I mean, you're describing Chris's job. This is what he does on a daily basis. And yeah, we started out in hoppy beers, but absolutely, I think Cosmic Punch is actually much more interesting in simple styles. Like if you just brew a blonde ale and don't dry hop it at all, you'll find out what thiols smell like, because there's nothing else to distract you from it. You're not getting flooded with monoterpene alcohols from the hops. It's all focused on the thiols that the yeast is putting out. And that's whereas when you use it like in any IPA, which is already very aromatic to begin with, I think it adds kind of maybe a little complexity and kind of like punches up the intensity a little bit, but it's not a flavor that's not already there. Because some of these hops come along with some of these styles, so it's just an amplification of it. But yeah, in different, very simple styles, it really presents itself and really, really drastically changes the beer.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the differential between phenols and esters when you're evaluating what your yeasts are contributing?
Yeah, so phenolics are what people always associate with what Belgian tastes like. So that's a very different compound from an ester, but it's all through the activity of this one enzyme called ferulic decarboxylase. So if you take ferulic acid that's naturally present in malt and it converts it into 4-VG, 4-vinyl glycol, and that's the aroma of hops, of clove. And so that's and most American ale yeast, English ale yeast, they actually have a mutated version of that gene. So American ales, English ales, lagers don't produce that compound because their version of FDC1 is broken. But Belgian yeast, it still functions properly, and that's why you get that kind of spicy, clovey aroma. Whereas esters are, chemically speaking, a combination of an acid and an alcohol, and give different fruit sensations. So, pineapple or apple or pear, those are all different kinds of esters. So various combinations of acids and alcohols. And different yeasts can put out different amounts and different types. Not a whole lot understood about the genetics there either. So I wouldn't call that fully understood. So there's still some room for figuring that out and manipulating it, moving it around. That's the gist of the esters versus phenolics.
I think a lot of times tasting, let's say British ales, and you get more of the esters, and now there's a recognition amongst home brewers that various pressures while fermentation is taking place affects a difference in the intensity of esters. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, we had started a line of experiments pre-pandemic that we didn't end up following up on, but yeah, there's some evidence to suggest that pressure fermentations can suppress ester formation. So what we were experimenting with at the time was in the lager context. So trying to ferment lagers at warmer temperatures, but under pressure, to try to get what tasted more like a slow cold fermented lager, but fermented more quickly at ale temperatures under pressure. And we were getting good results on it, but at the time we didn't even have a GCMS, so it'd actually be nice to revisit those experiments and actually take some objective measurements on it too, to see if we can detect with a machine any difference. Certainly sensory, we were making very good beers. There were different strains handled the pressure better than others. Some were would get kind of farty from my recollection when we were doing pressure fermentation at elevated temperatures, but there were some strains that handled it very well and made very quick turnaround lagers that way.
Some of the stuff I've read, Lance, is that the CO2 actually under pressure, the CO2 influences the metabolism of the yeast itself, and that actually influences the byproducts of the yeast fermentation. And that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that is true. On a kind of it's reminded me there's some evidence to show that when you, and we've seen this kind of in some of our experiments, when you have hops that you added very early in fermentation, you get a quicker and more complete fermentation. And it's not necessarily from the enzyme. There are some amylase enzymes that can break down dextrins in the hops, but it's not that. It's actually the particles in there are nucleation points for CO2. So it scrubs CO2 quicker, which the yeast likes. It doesn't like having all that CO2 around there. So yeah, the CO2 can absolutely influence the yeast. The more of it around, it'll struggle a little bit more. It'll be a little more stressed, but if you provide nucleation points for it, it'll actually speed up fermentation.
That's the secret of beechwood aging, right?
Yeah, probably surface area. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we all have read and experienced to different degrees oxygenation of the wort before it being exposed to yeast. I can remember years ago when you could achieve your desired results by taking a wire whisk and beating the hell out of the wort, and then adding the yeast. Now many homebrewers are using pure oxygen and introducing that. Can you kind of talk about what might be ideal from the yeast producer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, ideal is probably going to be oxygen, just because there's a limit to how much oxygen you can get in solution with air. And I think that limit, and again, it's going to depend on, there's also a relationship between the gravity of the wort and how much oxygen you can get in there. But assuming the same gravity of wort, air versus oxygen, I think you can saturate it at like 8 parts per million oxygen with just air, but you can get much higher than that by injecting pure oxygen. And some yeast need more oxygen than 8 parts per million. And British 5 and Cosmic Punch are a good example of that. They're very oxygen requiring strains. So generally speaking, you get better performance from those strains if you oxygenate, just because you can't. It's impossible to reach the level of oxygenation that they prefer by just doing aeration.
But then, as the yeast are regenerating with each new generation, they would prefer to have oxygen available to them for their cell development.
Yes.
But brewers want to, and it's in an environment that is getting an increasing amount of CO2. As you know, it's kind of like you're killing your kids with your CO2 and robbing them of the oxygen that they need. Are brewers missing the beat and not adding more oxygens later on? It's 6 to 1, half dozen of the other.
Only if you want to stale your beer. So adding oxygen after you've gotten considerable amount of fermentation, you're going to get oxidation. The yeast would absolutely prefer if you did that, and they'd be happy about it. But it would not make for good beer. So basically, we just give them a shot at the beginning, helps them regenerate some of the ergosterols in their cell walls, in their membranes, and then they'll dilute those amongst their daughters as they divide. And then, the next time you repitch them, you kind of give them a fresh dose so they can again regenerate, divide them out with their daughters. But if it didn't matter to beer quality, agitation, aeration throughout fermentation would be ideal for yeast. And in fact, that's what we do. But our job is to grow yeast, not to make beer. So we do, agitate our fermenters the entire time they're growing. We're shooting air into it the entire time, but that does not make for good beer. So yeah, they'd like it if you did that, but beer would suffer.
Okay. I've always wanted to show all of the boss members a photomicrograph video of yeast propagating the daughter cells. I saw that years and years ago. I thought it was one of the neatest things. Where does one find something like that? Is that on the internet somewhere?
Oh yeah, I'm sure if you Googled like yeast cell division video. I mean, God, I'll go onto YouTube right now and see if I can find something because there's probably something on YouTube.
Try yeast porn.
Yeah, right.
Just Google video search yeasty sex.
Yeah. There's videos. Yep. Oh yeah, very cool videos on YouTube of the bud actually growing out of the yeast cell and pinching off. Yep.
And the number of daughter cells, is it always the same number regardless of the strain of yeast?
With most things there's strain to strain variation. So I wouldn't doubt if that's something one examined, like how many daughters could one mother cell give birth to. There's probably a different average for each strain. Just these things have kind of evolved apart over the centuries of use, so they definitely can vary on things like that.
Well, and ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lance, but ultimately you want to sort of force the yeast into anaerobic reproduction so that it produces the alcohol, whereas when it's doing the aerobic reproduction and regrowing cells, it tends to not produce the alcohol that you're looking for in the growth of the yeast.
Yeah, that's generally true. Although in most beer making contexts, it's always ferment. Even in the presence of oxygen, they're still fermenting. There's yeast does a very strange thing. There's something called the Crabtree effect, that when the sugar level is beyond, and it's really only like 0.2%, they will preferentially ferment even in the presence of oxygen, which is unusual. No other organism does this. And because it's energetically, it's a stupid thing to do, because you get, I think the number is like 4 ATP molecules, which is the powerhouse of the cell. 4 ATP molecules per sugar molecule when you ferment it, versus when you respire it, you get like 32 ATPs. It's far more energetic for them to respire it. So the thinking is that this was kind of an evolutionary decision by the yeast to compete with the organisms around them. So they basically consume the sugar really, really quickly fermentatively, pump out all this alcohol that inhibits the growth of all the microbes around them and gives them kind of free rein to the sugar. So they'll ignore the fact that they've got oxygen, and yes, we could use this sugar more efficiently if we respired it, but all the sugar will be ours if we kill everything around us by pumping ethanol out.
Very cool.
So
That's awesome.
it's a very weird evolutionary thing they did, and part of it is probably also human intervention. Like we gave these things the environment to do this, and it benefits us. We can get drunk when we make beer, and it makes us feel good, or we put it in bread and it makes bubbles very quickly, and so this is. I mean, a lot of the things about yeast genetics are the way they are because of human intervention, just the environment we've provided for them.
Or the apples at the bottom of the tree that way the yeast get to actually keep eating the sugar while the monkeys get drunk or whatever.
And those monkeys spread the yeast around that way too.
It's the same with the lactic bacteria too, for lactobacillus, and they drop the pH so that they keep it so that they can benefit and grow and reproduce, and
nothing else can.
Very cool. Yeah, no, awesome. I didn't know that about the yeast. Thanks.
How do you store your different strains? Like we hear about yeast banks, and can you just explain how you do that?
Yeah, it's an extremely cold freezer, basically. So it's a freezer that goes down to minus 80 Celsius, which what is that Fahrenheit? I don't even know. For some reason, whenever I'm in science mode, I think Celsius, and when I'm in everyday mode, it's Fahrenheit. So I want to see what.
I only know what minus 40 is.
The way Mother Nature intended, Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's minus 112.
Cold.
Yeah, minus 112 Fahrenheit is the temperature at which we store our yeast. So when we get a culture in, we'll grow it up. We dilute it into 15% glycerol, which is like a cryoprotectant. So if you were to just freeze it in water, and especially if you just froze it at cooler temperatures, when ice is forming, it's forming and retracting crystals kind of as it freezes. And those crystals, when they form, can puncture yeast cells. So when you put something like glycerol in there that doesn't form crystals in the same way that water does when it freezes, it doesn't puncture those cells. And we do a snap freezing, so we'll dip it in like liquid nitrogen. It just freezes it very, very suddenly. And you can put it in the minus 80 and it's stable there for, I mean, you can't even do the experiment because it would probably, if you could keep minus 80 conditions in perpetuity, the yeast would be, no human has lived long enough to do this experiment themselves. So they're just stable in perpetuity at minus 80 Celsius.
What did they do before you had liquid nitrogen and other
freezers
sources?
Yeah, they would have been probably keeping them on like petri dishes, so like solid media petri dish plates, and you'd have to maintain them because they'll die gradually that way. So you basically would have to streak them onto another plate and kind of let them, let it sit there for a month or two and then do that again. I mean, the way breweries would have done it was just serially repitching. And that's how we got the evolution of the strains we have now, is because, brewery one was, going multi-generations, and brewery two borrowed that. Now you have an, geographically isolated strain that's going to get accumulate different mutations and kind of go off on its own evolutionary path. So that's how we have all the brewing yeast we have now, is from them getting spread out and just getting random mutations. So we've actually kind of arrested that process, doing it the way we do it now, where we have all the strains we have and then they're just frozen away, and we can go back to that stock and grow it up from that isogenic stock every time we want to grow them up. So we've kind of stopped that evolutionary process that gave us the diversity we have now.
So when you take samples from the one that's in the freezer, to start a new generation or a new line that you're gonna propagate, how do you're taking a little bit from that freezer stock every time, so how do you replenish that?
I don't think we've had to yet. I mean, we're really not, if we freeze away 2 milliliters, we're taking a couple microliters when we take a sample out of there to grow it back up. So we can get a lot of starts out of that. But if we were ever getting to the point where we were running out, then we would take that, grow it up into a new culture and freeze that away. So sure, for that one outgrow that we do at the end, there's a few mutations could accumulate, but probably not many. It's probably still effectively isogenic.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hey Lance, have you guys actually sequenced your yeast strains at this point, or no?
We did some when we did a study on diastaticus yeast, and we sequenced all of our diastatic strains just to kind of get some more information on them. We haven't done the entire collection, although it's been done, because I mean all the brewing yeast providers are using the same yeast strains, and so those have been sequenced. So the sequences for our strains are out there, but it was done by others.
That's cool. Yeah.
Pardon me while I text, because I was just getting a call from our alarm monitoring at the lab.
Hopefully the freezer didn't go down.
The minus 80 freezer is down.
Yeah. It's hopefully somebody will answer. Thankfully, multiple people are on this call chain, so hopefully somebody answers it.
I thought now would be a good time to bust in and take a bunch of yeast.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's what somebody's doing right now.
What is your recommendation on the number of repitchings that a home brewer and then also that a commercial brewer should do before starting fresh?
He'll tell you to never repitch because he wants to sell more packs.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeast, yeah.
So that we get that question a lot, and it's really it's one of those things that's beyond our control. It depends on what you're doing, what your practices are, and how frequently you brew, and the type of beers you're brewing. If you're brewing the same 4% low hop, low alcohol beer, and you're doing it once a week, that strain's going to maintain. I mean, you could go for 40, 50 generations that way because you're not putting huge amounts of stress on it. If you're brewing extremely high alcohol beers or hoppy beers, or you're brewing once a month, that drastically shortens the number of generations you're going to get out of it. So it's really all about the beers you're brewing, how you're treating it, how frequently you're brewing, all things beyond our control.
I can recall one of the early craft brewers in the Midwest bragged about 250 generations. And what their beer had was a delicacy. I don't mean that gustatorially. I mean that it was extremely delicate. Once the beer warmed up close to room temperature, if it was stored at that, it would go sour, like boom. And yet he was bragging about how much money he was saving by by washing the yeast and always using the same sanitizing liquids rather than manipulating and changing around.
I'm not a big believer in yeast washing, like the acid washing, just because my thinking is if you need to acid wash because you've got a bacterial load, you should be starting over with a culture that does not have a bacterial load.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think yeast acid washing should exist, because if you need to use it, you need to be starting over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, go ahead.
I was just going to say a somewhat related question then is, how many generations do you think these Voss or Hornindal or whatever strains had on them before Omega got to them?
Yeah.
They've been around since what, like BC times possibly? Yeah. Like who knows, right? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think they pin ale yeast domestication to the, I don't know, 13, 14, 1500, something like that. So if we can assume that one of the parents of Kveik was a domesticated ale yeast, then this domestication event happened sometime after that. But it probably only happened once. So every Kveik that's out there evolved from a single Kveik. I mean, the likelihood of a domesticated brewing yeast and the same type of wild Cerevisiae coming together more than once is extremely slim. So it was probably a single event. And again, they got passed from farm to farm and they went on their own evolutionary path. And that's how we have the genetic diversity within Kveik. But it was from a single progenitor. I mean, it had to have been.
It has to be hundreds of generations, right?
Hundreds, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying this is, whatever the wise move to make, but aren't there breweries in Europe, like England or other places, where they claim to never have repitched, like they've just been using the same yeast, just carrying it forward for hundreds of years? I mean,
yeah, and you could do that, but where you are now is not where you were at the start. I mean, We know that. I mean, there's actually been some somewhat recent work where a lab traced generations in a brewery. So they did sequencing projects on each generation, each repitch from a brewery, and saw actually fairly substantial drift in that time frame. So we're talking, one brewery over a couple months. So you can imagine, over hundreds of years, how much we deviated. So yeah, a brewery absolutely could do that, but where they are now is not where they were when they started.
Well, the Travis breweries, a lot of them started by borrowing another brewery's yeast, and then within, I don't know, a year or two, that's no longer that yeast anymore. It's their yeast now.
For sure. Yep.
I got a question. Sorry. I didn't want to interrupt. What were you saying?
It's real quick. Staying on that vein, Dick, I use Bayern yeast. I use yours for my lagers. I start with my Helles, and then I I capture that and I don't wash it, and then I go right to a Pilsner. Then I finish with an amber. So I have my brew days set up to where, and I got the spike system so I can capture it out of the conicals. So I use it 3 times. And actually the amber, and I think the Pilsner, when I came by your place, I brought some cans of the amber by Chris. I don't know. I think you had a chance to try it unless they drank them before you got to them. I don't know.
Probably did.
Yeah.
I think I got to try a little of the Hellas, but by then that was the last can left.
Yeah.
Over the course of the 2 days that I wasn't in the lab.
Yeah. That's as far as I go. 3. I'm done. I mean, and then I want fresh again. So I couldn't see going farther than that.
Dave, when you say amber, are you saying an amber lager?
Amber lager. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why I'll do the dark. Well, not that it's really a dark, but the amber color. I save that one for last on the 3rd pitch, and then I'm done. That's it. So,
Yeah. Reasonable approach.
Yeah.
Man,
So my question was about shelf stability. So I have this pack here. It's manufactured in June. What should I do with this? Should I prop it up? Is it good to go?
I mean, if you're comfortable doing that, that's always my take on it, and that's always how I did it when I was homebrewing. Is if you're comfortable with doing starters, there's no reason not to.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing, they got these like pre-canned starter thing that is totally awesome that it works with it. So my other one is I have one from 2016.
Holy shit, that's some old branding.
What would you do with this?
What strain is that?
There's like one cell left in there alive.
Send it back to them for a museum. Yeah.
Belgian Ale, OYL 028, 2016. It's just been, I kind of forgot about it. It's been sitting in the back. I consider it dead, but also I just can't throw it in the garbage.
Eat it some bread flour and see if you can make sourdough starter from it.
Dude, you'll be able to make beer out of that. Just start
You think so?
and you're good for sure.
I'd be
Absolutely
really curious to find out if there was living yeast in there. That'd be kind of a neat experiment.
All right, I'll do it for you guys.
You have to let your starter go about a week before you get in there.
Hornadol. I mean, so I just consider this yeast like invincible for some reason. Like it just seems like time nor heat will kill this yeast.
Yeah, and it's probably fine. It's just I just as a microbiologist, I always want to just know that I'm starting with a viable rare.
Yeah. No, I was actually I'm definitely gonna prop it up. It was like something that I got and then just forgot about, and then. But the Belgian yeast, like I think I want it. It's like I don't want to build, brew a Belgian. I'll do it in a couple months, and then
a couple months becomes 5 years.
6 years later.
Matt, you should totally do a Jim Cook. Just slice that thing open and drink it right now, and it'll keep you from having a hangover tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right, stand by.
Well, since most of your beers are liquid. Or most of your yeasts are liquid. What's your opinion about dry yeast? Obviously, you must have had some opinion that directed you to go
yeast liquid. They have a dry yeast now.
Yeah, I think dry yeasts have gotten better over the years. There's just because of the way they do it, it's not really possible for them to have the diversity that we can have in liquid yeast. So I would certainly always recommend to have it around, especially if, in an emergency you thought you direct pitch something that you thought was going to be viable wasn't, then you have this emergency yeast you can pitch. So they're good to have around. You're not going to be able to find as many, choices as you have liquid, but I'm not going to slag. You're not going to get any quotes out of me slagging dry yeast.
No, that wasn't my intent.
Yeah.
Follow on to Dick's question, like a lot of the Scandinavian brewers, they dry their yeast out between brews. So why isn't that the method we're following here in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, they're doing it in a very kind of rudimentary way.
For sure. And it works for them.
Yeah. But like the manufacturing process that dry yeast manufacturers use is huge and complicated. So when I was talking about fermentative versus respiratory growth, they actually do respiratory growth. And so they have to do what's called fed batch. So they have a big tank that they're gradually feeding with sugar to keep it below that important level where they do the switch to fermentative growth. So they can get huge amounts of biomass doing it this way, but it requires, equipment that's constantly reading the amount of sugar they have and the amount of, making sure they're not putting out ethanol. It's vastly different from the way we do it, and just takes a huge capital outlay. And again, they're doing giant batches of it, which limits their flexibility. And so it's just a different way of doing things, and pros and cons.
But Dick, they manufacture dry yeast now. Omega.
So
does.
we
Right?
we have a dry yeast in our portfolio. It is contract manufactured for us.
Okay. I understand.
No.
I just got this blast. It's like Omega dry yeast now. Get this, and I was like, okay. I was very interested in that.
Yeah, it's the Lutra strain that we had done with in collaboration with one of the large dry yeast manufacturers.
Oh. Well, those yeasties are just amazing. You go home and dream of yeast at night?
Unfortunately, frequently I do.
Is Chris still on the call?
Yeah, he's right there.
Is he? I can't see.
I'm still here.
I got
I'm just
Steve's-
silently listening,
I understand.
enjoying
Chris, can
the
you tell us
company.
about the pilot system that you guys use?
Hey, could you guys turn off the screen sharing so we can see faces now? And I don't think we need to see the thing anymore, right?
PowerPoint. Yeah,
Get a PowerPoint.
Steve's doing it.
Yeah, so our pilot system is a 1-barrel Blickman electric coil rims system. So it's a very big homebrew system. And generally when we're doing sensory, we'll do as little as 15 gallons to as big as a full barrel, and just split it up like 3 to 6 ways between different yeast strains, different brewing variables like dry hopping rates, temperature changes, like Lance mentioned, fermenting under pressure, and just like general sensory between styles, just for staff education and whatnot. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of 5-gallon systems too, just for people to play around with. So we have our secret tap lines always filled with beer.
So you get to brew a new beer like every day, or like what does your as an innovation brewer, like that sounds so fascinating to me. Like what does that entail for you? Like 4 days a week you brew 4 different beers, or like what does that look like?
So we don't have the capacity to do like a barrel a day. It's a lot of beer, and especially since we're not distributing, it's all for in-house consumption and sensory. And that is a lot of beer for the staff that we have. So most of what I do on the pilot system is for R&D purposes, for like side-by-sides and sensory and whatnot. But then we do also let the staff brew on it also for like fun beers, just to get them familiarized with the brewing process. A lot of our staff comes from like homebrew background, not brewing background, people just wanting to get into the industry. We have a lot of scientists and whatnot, like a lot of biologists, some chemists and whatnot, that aren't very familiar with the brewing process. So it's our way of getting them familiarized with the brewing process. Furthermore, helping them understand how our product affects beer, and what our product, what the end result is, essentially what we're doing for the beer industry, just to get them a bigger sense of ownership as to what we're doing here. I do try to brew like a 5-gallon batch for fun every week too, just to have beers that aren't strictly for sensory on tap for everyone.
So you're brewing on and off throughout a week, and then like how often are you cranking out like a new beer then off of these things, and where does that data go and how does it get used?
So we use Google Forms right now, just with general questionnaires, ranking systems, sensory analysis, like what they're perceiving. And then for all of our R&D sensory, we always have a purpose to it. For example, like haze stability based off of dry hopping schedules or sourness perception. We have the staff just try everything, fill out a survey, and rank based on, depending on what the test is, like what you're perceiving, what your preference is. For the Cosmic Punch, for the thiolized version, we're always looking for what they're perceiving in terms of the flavor, and then like their preference between the thiolized version and the parental version, and on top of that, like how much thiol characteristic you're perceiving out of the modified Cosmic Punch. So I would say each week we're doing a sensory, or at least we're trying to do a sensory. When you pepper in lagers with that, they have a longer fermentation time, so it's sometimes we'll have 2 sensories per week and we'll skip a week. But we'll generally do a sensory analysis every week or so. And we collect data through Google Forms.
And is it in-house staff that you do this with, or do you do this with like a contract lab that has like dedicated tasters, or like how does one get involved in all of this? Like, I guess I'm trying to figure out.
We do in-house staff. We do have some, I would say, more experienced tasters. I wouldn't say professional tasters, but more experienced tasters, especially because a lot of us have been in the industry for an extended period of time and obviously love beer. But, any data that we could get in terms of sensory analysis is valued, just because, we work in a very consumer-driven industry, so the consumers aren't professional tasters. Sensory data for general flavor perception is helpful with our less experienced tasters at work. But we are hoping to develop a training program to help expand our advanced sensory people.
So
I don't think we're ever going to get to the
basically.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get to the professional tasting level, but more advanced.
We know some guys.
Yeah,
Probably help out with that. Yeah,
A couple one or twos.
Yeah, like Matt's kind of saying, Chris, is that if you guys need to do a panel of different things, we've got quite a few basically certified judges and everything else through Boss. We'd be happy to help you guys out. Like you could set up a profile and you could run us through a tasting, and we would be more than happy to volunteer our time and our taste buds
and our livers,
some of your beers.
I mean, really though, we have one of the founding members is a regular judge at the GABF. He has been for, Marty. How long has Marty been a GABF judge? I mean,
20 years or something. Yeah.
He do you know Marty Nachel? It's that name ring a bell? Yeah. So
Name is familiar.
He'd die for something like this.
Yeah.
This is his bread and butter, man.
We wouldn't have a hard time getting good.
No,
qualified
God,
members.
no. He
Yeah.
flies out to Denver every year for GABF, and he's been doing it for, I don't know, at least 20 years. I would say probably.
We'd brew enough beer that, I mean, we could do something like that sometime.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
When we're getting close to like a new strain release to get some broader opinions. It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
We don't want to jump in and be the whole like, hey, I'm your new girlfriend. Do you
No,
need
I
to-"
know.
Yeah. Like we're
Just
just
we have
offering if you need it. Yeah.
respectable resources. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well,
It
if you guys,
could definitely be a bus trip for Boss. We would love to, send 30 people your way. And
if you guys like karaoke, that'll sweeten the pot, because we have a good karaoke system on site too.
You have any old music on that?
We connected to YouTube. We got whatever you want.
yeah.
Dick's
We'll make
gonna
that
sing
work.
Bing Crosby over there.
Yeah.
There's
Whatever your
100%.
jam is fun.
Well, it's fascinating what you're doing, and I kind of think that maybe years back I went into the wrong field, but way back then we didn't have that kind of stuff, and think like, wow, all of this manipulation. You've got we got the four beers today. I think this is a good experiment. I think being able to identify all of these variables are on taste perception. There's so much variability, not only from person to person, but inter person variability also. That. What did you have to eat? If I remember early on, people say, "Yeah, well, I came to this beer competition. I brushed my teeth, just before I came." And it's like, well, what did you brush them with? Well, toothpaste. Or back in the day when we would use cedar wood pencils and doing the tasting, and you would go like this in between the tasting and rest it. Like everything has kind of like a woody character to it, but it's all of them do that. Or alternatively, go with the magic marker character, and everything is a phenolic note, I suppose. But fascinating. And you guys happy with your jobs?
I think I have the best job at Omega. Sorry, Lance.
Yeah, Chris has to say that with me on here. I love what I do. I mean, I used to be a lawyer, so obviously this is better than that. And because we have this strong desire to do R&D. I mean, that's a big focus of what we do. It's what Chris does, and we have a department dedicated to it. Innovation and coming up with new things and just learning more is what drives me. So our bread and butter is getting yeast out there and selling yeast, but it's all what we're doing. Kind of we're reinvesting profits to just make brewing better, to learn things. So that's what I find fun about it, is just because we're always doing something new.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Well, I can say I predominantly use Omega yeast. I'm not just saying that because you're in there, but I do, and I especially for my lagers, I use it all the time. And the question came up about the dry yeast, versus liquid yeast, and everybody. I mean, you have your own opinions, and dry yeast works fine. I know plenty of guys that use it, and they've won medals and awards. I kind of look at it a little bit like, and maybe this is just my perception of almost like real milk versus powder milk. If you have to make it, I prefer the liquid yeast. I love your Bayern. I use that thing all the time, and I've tried the other yeast. I've tried the dries, and my beers don't turn out the same. And that's my perception, but I swear by it. I swear by your yeast and especially your lager yeast. And, the other ones are obviously good too, but you know.
Well, thank you. It's rewarding to hear things like that. So I appreciate that.
You know, the bigger hit is it's local. Like shit. When the hell did we suddenly get a fucking local yeast? Like that was not a thing. You know, it wasn't a thing we all started. Like
I mean, that's one of the biggest things. I'll get a pack sometimes it's 2-3 days old when it's packaged. I'll build my starter, whatever I need, and man, that yeast is ready to roll. And good yeast makes good beer. Everything else is
yeah, absolutely.
Brews are some of the ingredients, and the yeast makes the beer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, you guys. I mean, we really
thanks for everything, man. This is
and having a meeting and stuff. It was, cool.
And before you go, behind me, I have one of our premium signs that this logo was started 30 years ago when we started our club. And this year, this was what we made into a premium for our members. And we have one for you guys to hopefully hang up at your shop. We'll get it to you around the time that we'll also stop by and ask you if you got any donations for our competition.
We're down. We're always willing to donate.
Always be working, Dick.
Yeah. Always willing to donate.
A good trade. It's a good trade.
And it's one of these porcelain signs. I'm sure you've seen those. The quality is unbelievable.
They'll stop a bullet. Yeah.
It's going to be one of the best tin signs you've ever seen in your life, for real. I don't know if you've seen tin signs before, but this one is going to blow your mind. It's
the tinniest of the tin.
Good job, Dick. You can't turn that cell switch off. You can't reach it. It's right back here. You're somewhere. You can't find the offset.
But no, you guys, it was fabulous. Thank you for your time and everything. We really appreciate it.
No, indeed, it's been
really
a true joy, a true pleasure, and just a wonderful learning experience just to hear more about this. So, thank you both very, very much. It's been fantastic. We couldn't have asked for more.
And thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
This is where we turn to like the 3-hour part of the meeting where we just keep drinking.
You guys are welcome to keep drinking.
To hang out.
We're just gonna talk about. We're going to use a lot of S words and F words and all that.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly comfortable with that. I probably will go help put the kids to bed and nurse the cold that they gave me a few days ago.
Oh,
gosh.
You haven't been wearing
just a cold too.
You
I've been
haven't
tested.
been
They were
wearing.
tested.
You haven't been wearing your masks at home.
Well, yeah, not at home. My kids got it from the kid neighbors, and it's like, well, at least it was just a cold, and they didn't pass the bad stuff. But shows you how easily it can happen.
Kids are walking petri dishes. That's what they are.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're back to that realm again. All right. Well, I'm gonna help with the kids, but it was a pleasure to be here and speak with everybody.
Thank you so much.
Chance and Chris, thank you very much. That was really informative and just an enjoyable meeting. So appreciate it. Ed, thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ed.
Thanks for reaching out.
He's our education czar.
Bye.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Adios.